I beg your pardon? Councilmember Rao,
Present.
Councilmember Gums,
Present.
Councilmember Willis. Councilmember Willis,
Present.
Councilmember Gilliard. Councilmember Gilliard. Councilmember Reeves,
Accounted for.
Councilmember Khalid. Councilmember Khalid. Councilmember Baker.
Present.
Also present is the city manager, Mr. Donald, city attorney, Ms. Walker, and I believe Councilmember Gilliard is here.
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Khalid. And the mayor is not present. You have a quorum, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, you can sound the first item, please.
The first item is a public hearing for the second reading of the FY21 proposed budget. An ordinance to adopt the fiscal year 2021 budget for each fund of the city of South Fulton, appropriating the amounts showing in each fund as expenditures expenses, adopting the several items of revenue anticipation, prohibiting expenditures or expenses or from exceeding the actual funding available in the amount of $112,142,138.
Okay.
Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem.
Good morning.
If you would allow, the mayor had asked, and I coordinated through memorandum to the council an overview of the unbudgeted items related to the FY21 proposed budget and recommendations on how to proceed in prioritizing. If you deem it appropriately, there's a presentation filed with the clerk that we can review as a part of this meeting.
Yes, let's do that for the public's knowledge. So do you want to go ahead and begin that presentation,
Yes,
Madam Clerk? Okay.
Let me ask one question. Do you want to hear the one public comment form I had first?
That's right.
Yes.
Okay, we had one public comment to come in from Glenda Collins, 3740 Morning Creek Drive, District 5. With the increase of the millage rate, will all items for the budget for 2020 be funded at 100%? Or will the city face a shortfall? Will funds be allocated to the contingency funds from the increase in the millage rate? And that is the public comments. And I will get the presentation ready.
Right.
Thank you.
And so Mayor Pro Tem, while she coordinates that, just to highlight for you, the staff and the public, we identified in the proposed budget based on the rollback rate, which of course I think we have gone over in detail, had some pretty extensive cuts. And so those cuts, while the recommendation is to restore some services, there's also a part of the city manager's recommendation is to augment the contingency fund so that mayor and council have the flexibility that as the year moves forward, you may augment cuts, you may decide to fund different priorities, but also be prepared for any emergencies that will arise. And so, Madam Clerk, if you'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, so, again, during the transition, I just wanted to provide a very brief summary that during the transmission of the FY21 proposed budget, we did use the rollback millage rate of 12.399 to ensure that that basic service level would be maintained during FY21. I would say that, I think it's important to note that the city of South Fulton has done, a pretty solid job of making sure that while we budget at a certain level for both revenues and expenses, we have always exceeded our revenue expectations, and we have come in below budget by almost 20%. While those numbers will likely change during the pandemic, which is, I think Councilmember Gilliard has been very good at noting there are a ton of unknowns that we don't know and we're not prepared for. The reason we've made these significant cuts is to ensure we're as best positioned as possible. And so on September 2nd, the council decided to adjust the millage rate slightly to ensure that the city has enough resources and the ability to prepare for these various emergencies. And so as you look at these cuts, I will just preface that there are two things that are in the background. There is, and you can go to the next slide, Madam Clerk, I apologize again. There was a large amount of cuts, about $6.4 million is the total amount of unfunded department activities. And while this looks like a very large number, I am confident that we will be able to not only augment this number with the additional revenues, but also be able to leverage the CARES Act activities. I know that Mayor Edwards had a pre-meeting, and I had the pleasure of speaking to some of those mayors this morning related to the advocacy of the CARES Act. And I know that the council unanimously supported the advocacy that should bring about $70 million rightfully to the North and South Fulton cities, which will also help to augment some of these cuts and ensure that we deliver quality services to our residents. And so the key on this slide is that it is $6.4 million that has been cut, and that does not include $200,000 from finance for professional services and another $50,000 from an additional $50,000 from HR for some employee morale information and update activities. And so the number is actually a little closer to about $6.7 million. Next slide. And so I will go through. Yes, sir, Mayor.
I just want to let you know I was here. I'm multitasking right now, but I'm on the call.
Yes, sir. Very aware.
Mayor Pro Tem, point of order.
Councilwoman Willis, yes.
Can you please ask everyone to mute their phones? It's a lot of feedback and a lot of distraction while Mr. Donald is trying to do this presentation.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Clerk, can you make sure everyone's phone is muted?
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor Edwards, I know that you hit the mute button, but I think your phone is also unmuted right now. Got it. See it. All right. And so again, I apologize, Madam Clerk and Mayor Pro Tem. What I have done is put together a summary of since the millage rate decision. I've worked with staff to identify their top priorities in the presentation that were cut, of their priorities. There's a large swath of activities, but their top three in order of priority based on the department head is included for your awareness. And so I'll give a brief overview, and at the end, all department heads are available, not only for this meeting, but at the next meeting to provide any insights as you as a council and your wisdom decide which of these are priority, whether you accept mine or you believe that some of the ones identified by the department heads rise. And so for communications, they have accepted all cuts, but the three areas that they do deem to be important is this social media audit, which I think is a key tool for us during the improvement of our online delivery of services. I think that piece is quite important for them. They also, as we continue to adjust our brand, they've looked at the development of a style guide for city publications and the website to further codify those activities. And we currently have a partnership with the South Fulton Observer to help us, navigate the calendaring of both city events, council events, and merging things in the community that are important. I'll just say all of these things are vitally important, but while the city manager's office has taken some cuts, more than willing to ensure that we bring these things on within budget without, having to prioritize them through the council having to figure that out, how to allocate those resources. I am providing a commitment to be able to coordinate that through the city manager's office. And so instead of including it in their budget or making it a priority with these quote unquote new revenues, I believe that we can figure that out in-house. And so I would not consider it to rise to the priority of the council. Again, next slide. For community development and regulatory affairs, these would be their top 3 priorities, and I'll give you a little bit of color because these contracts are in place. They are just either augmentations that are required, renegotiation of contracts, etc. I apologize. I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, if you could go back to that slide. Thank you. And so the technical expertise of the consulting firm related to the comprehensive plan, while there is funding, because we would not cut services related to the comprehensive plan, that cut does impact the comp plan. And while I believe it's important, I think with a staff of about 40 folks over there, we have some technical expertise to be able to bring that number down. And I believe we have to take better control of the delivery of our plans and ensure that the public has a greater say. And so I have asked staff to ensure that is the case. I also believe that our budgeting for the Charles Abbott contract, I think it's been pretty well renowned that we have turned that into a model that is revenue generating for us. And so while we do have to adjust the projected revenues, I am working with finance to actually lay that out better, because if we are increasing revenues, for example, I think that contract is now at 60-40 in the city's favor. It was actually opposite when I arrived, and thanks to Ms. Reed, Ms. Winfield, the city treasurer, and others, we actually again have turned it into a revenue generating contract. And so if we better project our revenues and better project our expenses, I believe that $200,000 issue goes away. That is more of a numbers and accounting piece than it is actual allocation of resources. And so I can go into that more in depth, but I think we can do that outside of this conversation. Also, again, no secret, my recommendation is to halt all travel and training until the pandemic has either subsided or there's been significant progress. Again, a nominal fee of $5,000, despite the cuts that have been made to the city manager's budget. I believe that we can augment that and look at that as the pool of resources. I also did not fully cut the same amount of cuts in finance, and made it clear that any augmentations that are needed could come from either the city manager side of the house or the treasurer side of the house. And I believe we can cover this $5,000. So again, I do not see these as priorities that the council would be responsible for identifying and prioritizing with additional resources. Next slide. Again, for Destination South Fulton, there are 2 positions that are directly related to the Collab South activities in our Main Street program, or staffing mainly for Collab South, but in support of the Main Street program as well as equipment, furniture, and fixtures related to Collab South and the business development manager role. All very important, and you know that we are moving forward with those activities, but the timing based on the pandemic, which will continue on through at least Q1, make it unlikely that those expenses would be there. If we remain on track where after Q1 we are always below on spending by upwards of about 25%, then I believe that the cost savings, as well as how we receive our cash flows from both our loss funds and our residential property taxes, will give us a better opportunity to evaluate when and how to invest these resources. So again, while these are priorities, I do not believe that as we look at the adopted budget, they are things that we should address at that time. Now, again, when you talk to department heads, they are fully empowered to have differences of opinion. That's just kind of how I operate, and I have instructed them to be as compelling as possible. But as the person that has the purview of the entire city, my recommendation would be to hold on some of these until we can better evaluate within the pandemic. Next slide, please. Again, from finance, these professional services fees have been reduced. I believe that we have made significant investments in tools and equipment that we have not fully implemented that help to offset some of these services. We also have contracts in place that take us into mid-year, so we will be able to actually manage these funds. And so the total amount is about $200,000 that finance asked to be placed back into the budget. But again, if you revisit our budget deliberation videos and the information that I provided, we are able, now we will be running lean, but we are able to sustain on the professional services side of the house. And we also have the ability that once the adopted budget is passed, if it's within the same area, meaning operations or personnel on those different sides. For personnel, if we don't increase head count, we're able to move money around. On the other side of the house, the operational side of the house, we can also move funds around in that way to be able to cover. Done an exceptional job of that during these 3 years that we've been together, and I'm extremely confident that we can continue that. Next slide. For fire and rescue, we did have plans of an additional fire engine plus additional tools and equipment. In addition to that, refreshing some vehicles to provide better administrative coordination. While these things are important and there are minor service impacts, we did, under your leadership, make some very significant investments in the previous year. And I will tell you that the commitment that I made to our staff was that we would invest in fire heavily in year one to ensure that our ISO rating was maintained, because it was projected to go from 3 to 4. We made those recommendations in year one to stay on our path towards getting a 1 ISO, but at minimum maintaining 3 and keeping the savings to our residents in place. And so that is still going on at this time. And so now I think it is time to make those year 2 investments into police and public works, which I will go into later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. For human resources, again, I mean, I think, it's important in a city where we are both building the plane and flying it at the same time, that we invest in recognizing employee accomplishments and building morale. But I will say that we have continuously, under the leadership of both Mr. Malazi and through my office and the leaders that we have there, invested in our employees, and we will not waver from that. And so the reduction from human resources had been placed fully in the purview of the city manager's office and the city treasurer's office. We have made those public commitments to continue that, so much so that now that we have presented to the council the new policy in support of our public safety staff, we will be having a socially distanced education event where we will help to support morale and hopefully highlight the great support provided by executive leadership and the council if that policy passes. And we will continue those type of things throughout the year within budget despite these cuts. Next slide, please. for Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Affairs, they do have one of the older fleets, and there have been some challenges with their automobiles, and there needs to be a refresh. But we are going through the process of assessing the capital needs in the 13 URAs. There are some supports for park and recreation there. And we have so far during our implementation of any of those activities come in under budget. And so if that is the case, it is my recommendation to keep these cuts, delay the investment, and then leverage the URA if there continue to be those significant cost savings in the areas allocated to parks and recreation. I've had the pleasure of working with the Development Authority under the leadership of Councilmember Baker, and they are prepared to bring something forward soon that supports economic development at no cost to the city and investment in our parks. And so with that being on the table, I think that will have even additional cost savings that could help to augment this area. And so in addition, the CARES Act funding with the advocacy of the mayors, I think the mayor is kind of working on that now during this meeting, and we expect to have some good news from that. And so between those two, I believe that we can be creative in meeting those needs, but not leveraging new revenues from the city. Next slide, please. For police, I will say this is an area that I believe is one of the priorities, not only because as city manager, I made those commitments to staff and the council last year, but also when we look at maintaining public safety. And I think, violent crime is down. We're down in almost every area. Although we have had, some challenges, the quality of life activities are really the things that have started to creep up a little bit. And so that has a lot to do with our manpower, our beats, and the ability to deliver services quickly. And so the biggest part of that are the police officer 2 positions based on the leadership that we have in place and our councils, focus on community policing. There is no shortage of certified officers who want to join us. And while police have asked for 28 additional police officers, I believe we can support a number that is lower than that. And the investment in this fiscal year will be less. I'll actually go into that in detail here in a few slides. And so I'll hold on going deep into that. In addition to that, you see the 2020 lease vehicles and the 2019 lease vehicle numbers displayed to you. What I would say is that those funds, the capital funds, I think our city treasurer has been very clear that all of the capital funds were moved into the URA, but we just got to the assessment. The next piece is the project plan. Once we move those funds into the URA for those capital leases, it is not solely for 1 year, it is for the full term of the lease. And so I have directed both finance and police to work together to ensure that that has been accounted for. And so I do not see that as a priority. I see that as an opportunity for good management. And so the focus should be on the police officers. Next slide, please. For public works, I will tell you that the level of unfunded needs is enormous. And there are some ways, I don't think it's a secret that, we have leveraged the great relationships that we have both through my office, our council, our mayor, and our public works director to leverage more funding than likely any other city in our region in support of maintenance. But the needs are so overwhelming because of the years of ignoring them from the previous leadership prior to there being a city. And so while there are multiple needs, my recommendation, I am confident that I can work with GDOT and have already begun that. And big thanks to Kathy Zahul from GDOT for providing that additional $350,000 for Cascade, and we are in talks for additional augmentation above what they have provided. And so the bridge maintenance, while the cost is 1.5 million, we will not have to ante up all of that. But I believe ensuring that bridge maintenance and not impacting our traffic flow negatively has to be a priority. Next slide, please. In addition to that, the state road right-of-way maintenance, I think Mayor Pro Tem has been called the clean lady, you know, because of how much, you know, she's focused on making sure the right-of-way maintenance in her area, as well as Council Member Rowell and Council Member Reeves, really all the council is focused on the right-of-way maintenance. The biggest challenge, Council Member Willis as well, but right-of-way maintenance on the state roads is not necessarily the responsibility of the city, but our residents and council are unified in the desire to ensure that we do a better job than the state, and I think we can. And so we have partnered with the state to identify a opportunity to piggyback and negotiate a rate that takes care of all right-of-way maintenance on those state roads. And so the cost that the state pays, I think, is closer to about $250,000 for those areas. That would remain in place. And they would do it, I think they do it once every 45 days. Mr. Valenzuela can verify that, but we would be able to augment that, I think, on a 3-week cycle that would help us ensure that we get the level of right-of-way maintenance necessary for our city. And then third, we currently street sweep twice a year based on our current contract. We could get 6 additional sweeps for the cost of $124,000 citywide. And so that is another focus that I think would be the top 3 priorities. And we will be bringing the Comcast piece back to you for existing trash cans to ensure that we manage that, and that is done in budget this year. And then at the mid-year budget, these other priorities I believe we can tackle, including expanding the trash can program and entering into phase 2 of another. And so again, my recommendation with the limited funding is bridge maintenance, state roads and right-of-way maintenance, and street sweeping. Next slide, please. Madam Clerk, next slide, please. And you can go to the next slide. And you can go one more. And so my recommendation, again, just highlighting those decisions that we have made to maintain the ISO and put some heavy investment into our fire personnel, even down to turnout equipment and things of that nature. And while they need and deserve additional investment, we have to continue to prioritize to keep our good financial footing and make the steps necessary. And so I believe that the next step is to leverage any excess revenues in the police and public works. And again, this is just the city manager's recommendation. By no means is this any directive or request or formal anything to the council. It is just simply my initial assessment. I always learn when I talk to the council, as you have your thumb on the pulse of our residents, that there are sometimes additional consideration that take other things and they rise to the top. And in your leadership, you have done an excellent job over the city's first 3 years to make sure we move the city forward at rapid speed. So this is my attempt to just provide the most information possible and a cheat sheet on these priorities. Next slide. And so this is simply the total allocation of new funding based on the millage rate is projected at $1,126,000 based on the slides that the city treasurer forwarded to you a couple of days ago. So I just used a round number of 1.1 million to just kind of highlight what my general recommendation is, and I'll talk through it a little bit. So we would augment the contingency at about $300,000 above where it is to take us a little bit above $2 million. We would then take about $300,000 for police, because while we have a hiring freeze for the balance of the year, there is a process that they have to go through to hire people. And so anyone would not start until the end of Q1 per se, which means not only do you have additional cost savings within the budget, but you would also have that $300,000 augmentation. If you just did some quick math and said that folks were at about $40,000 per an officer, and if you did so at about, let's just say 10 officers, we added to the head count, that would be about $400,000 he'd be able to hire in Q1, 10 officers quickly. And that would make a huge difference on everything from comp time and overtime to be able to take those costs down. But then we'd also be at the end of Q1 where we would be reevaluating our budget and our finances. And if our quality management continues, I believe we would project to have maybe not the full 25 to 28% that we normally have after Q1, but we still be closer to about 20%. At that time, we could reallocate an additional 10 officers would be my recommendation. And that would allow, while the chief's request was 28, it would get us 20 officers on the street within this year, despite the pandemic. And so that is why my recommendation is to add a flat $300,000 and then trust the chief's leadership on how he would adjust his staffing plan to get that first initial 10 officers with a commitment of after Q1 to be able to augment it with up to 10 following that. On public works, fairly confident in the conversations that we've had. Definitely trust the partnership with GDOT as they understand the importance of City of South Fulton is likely Georgia's, most important city, definitely in our region. And then the grants that we have already received and allocated the match within the budget. I think an additional $500,000 to be able to do the state right-of-way maintenance. Also augment the maintenance fund to fill potholes and things of that nature and support bridge maintenance, give Mr. Valenzuela and his team a great head start to also leverage the URA and the great investments that the council has made in the infrastructure to keep all projects moving and keep us on pace during the pandemic. And so that is the city manager's recommendation and assessment of where we are. And hopefully it has provided a quality cheat sheet for the council as you begin to prioritize. And so, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, that concludes my presentation and recommendation.
Thank you, City Manager Donald. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone in the queue that has any questions?
I'm in the queue.
I'm not in the queue. Is the queue open?
I'm in the queue.
Yes,
One
it
second,
is.
everybody.
It
One
is
second.
open.
Okay,
I'm
I'm addressing the pro tem.
Excuse me,
Pro tem.
I'm in the queue.
Okay.
I'm
Ladies,
addressing the pro tem.
Hello, council members.
please.
Q is Councilmember Gilliard, Councilmember Khalid, and Councilmember Willis would be next.
Okay, so in that order, Councilwoman Gilliard.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Donald regarding the dirt road calcium chloride application.
Yes, ma'am.
While I know that the schools are, well, they're really, really not open with the buses on the road, but the critical issue is that people are using Hall Road as a shortcut from 92 to Cedar Grove back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so the residents that live on that street are really going to be impacted if we can't find this $60,000 to apply to that road.
I'm sorry, I may have missed your question. You're saying, well, so I think we're aware. I'll be pretty frank with you. I think Mr. Valenzuela is on top of it, and we are looking for additional funding. I don't want to, before we acquire funding, I don't want to, put things out there to say that we'll acquire it. I'm confident in the bridge augmentation. I've sat in-person meetings in the midst of a pandemic and acquired, some commitments that I believe help us. On that piece, I think that it is a priority, but in our list of priorities, I think we can maintain it. And by adding funding to the maintenance account, we should be able to address some of those things in budget. I'll also defer to Mr. Valenzuela if he has additional insights into that. But again, all of those are included. I think my piece is that we've got to prioritize. And when we look at the top of the pecking order, while we want to provide the services to all citizens, adding $1 million, I mean, I would defer to the council on how you want to allocate it, but these are my recommendations, and I think we can be creative in how we address individual projects, but I wouldn't pick that project over a bridge that stops us from, transitioning. So that's all I would say to that.
So I wouldn't expect you to do that. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because you gave us the three priorities, and I know that's an environmental issue and it's a health issue. So
Yes,
that's why I was bringing it to the table, to make sure that that it is included in a priority.
Oh, yes, ma'am. And I apologize if I wasn't clear on that. We believe all of those are priorities. And yes, you've been a staunch advocate for not just that project, but all of the environmental related activities. And so we are not turning a blind eye to that at all. And again, my recommendations are just on the priorities of reallocation, but the council as a whole has been clear that acquiring grant funding, partnering with other agencies, and just making sure we get the job done however it has to get done, that is well received and clear, and we are prepared to do that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next in the queue, did you say Councilman Khalid?
Yes.
Councilman Khalid.
Hey, thank you so much. I have a couple of questions. First, could you talk about what the social media audit is?
Yeah.
And I'm going to need to share my screen, so if I'm going to ask the clerk if they could set that up, because I just want to go over this document.
Yeah, and I'll let Mr. Leftwich, you can chime in and give him the technical definition or coordination related to it. If you give him a second to unmute, and if you ask your question or whatnot, we can definitely go through it.
And while we're waiting for Mr. Leftwich, if you could go ahead, my next question is about the
Point of order, Chair.
And he's on and ready, by the way.
Yes, point of order.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any way that we could, before documents are shared from council members, is there any way that we can get these documents up front? Because I feel blindsided when we are asking to share documents on screens that has not been publicly advertised, or or haven't been given the ability for residents to be shared with the information.
Okay, we will address that, and we can address that through policy. At this point, we are trying to move through this budget hearing, so we'll address that.
Okay, so for the record, this is the list that you just went through verbally. I would just like for people to see the list that you just spent the last 10 minutes going through verbally.
Yes, sir. It's actually it's on the city manager's page, as well as the presentation for the edification of the public is always under budget. And so it is there and readily available.
Okay, so all of these documents are, this document that I'm sharing is publicly available.
Yes, sir.
Thank you
It's
so
on
much.
yes, sir.
I'm going to come back to my question for Mr. Leftwich, but my question for finance, what are the $200,000 in professional services? What professional services are those?
They have been listed out if you have seen them.
The Edmunds financial software, Sage is the financial advisor, which would be Mr. Ed Wall.
We pay also the tax that we receive. We pay fees to the county. It comes from finance.
And so these are all things that you don't do personally, but you outsource to other people to do. Is that correct?
That's true.
Okay. And then so I'll bring Mr. Leftwich back to just maybe explain in a little bit more detail what a social media audit is.
Yes, sir. We have worked diligently to grow the reach of our social media channels, our digital media, and the reach is not what we would like it to be. And so we want to bring a professional in because we do not have someone with expert level background in social media that knows the technical details of how those channels work and how you build audience and how you know the right times of day to post what messaging. And we would like for someone to be able to have that expertise at hand and have someone study our channels, study the activity on them, study the posting, and then make recommendations, because we are trying to move to a more digital presence in terms of communicating. Certainly we're not solely going to be digital, but we want to strengthen our digital presence so that we are reaching everybody with details of meetings, details of city events, details of city projects, details of new legislation. And we want to drive those numbers higher and make sure we are using all of our social media and digital media tools, including our phone app, the It's My Town app, Nextdoor, newsletters sent through other through emails to residents. We want to make sure all that is working in harmony and efficiently and supporting each other. And we just need that outside expertise to tell us the best practices and the best way to make that happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So
again, this is all for providing service to the residents, keeping them keeping them informed, keeping them up to date, and we are addressing comments that that maybe meetings are not advertised as widely. We are advertising heavily on social media, all meetings, all events. We want to make sure we're doing that to see if there's things we can do to improve that further.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Yes, sir.
And I'm just for the benefit of my colleagues, I'm asking these questions in response to questions that I am seeing in the chat. So, you know, people had questions about like what a social media audit was and what these other things were. So I'm just trying to be responsive to folks in the chat. That is, and so the last question is for Mr. Donald. So we have this memo that we got from you that outlines all of these things that are a priority. My challenge is this, is that like, here are those items represented graphically in a budget form. We know that we are going to get we expect to receive about $1.1 million in new taxes, but the total of all of these priorities that you've listed is over $5 million.
That's correct.
So it seems like there's still more. We virtually have cut, if you look at the items in gray on this list, they're the only things that have been cut. So we virtually have cut nothing from the list. And I just want to be clear, I know that we may get some CARES Act funding. You talked about URA money. You feel like there's going to be enough additional things coming in to cover all $5 million of these items?
Absolutely not. I think what's clear is that there is not enough money, and there will not be enough money to cover all of those items. If there's not enough revenues to cover those, then what you have to do is prioritize which ones impact our services the most and allocate funds to that. And so my recommendation is that you allocate those funds across those subject areas, and then the rest, it is the responsibility of staff to work to get it done. We're not going to identify a magic pill out of the sky, and so you have to do excellent management to be able to do it. And so what I have presented to you is how we would allocate the 1.1 million and then leverage everything from CARES Act to the current URA to our relationship for additional grants and aid and other activities to be able to meet the needs. And you just may not meet all of them. And while it's unfortunate, we are in a global pandemic where about $12 million was cut from our projected revenues. And in addition to that, we've had to make additional cuts to ensure that we can deliver services. And so I don't have an answer to you and how we would replace $7 million, but through a combination of quality management, additional revenues, and sweat equity, meaning we just gonna have to continue to work our tails off, we meet the needs of residents.
Okay. So the amount of the number of new police officers that is already included in the $68 million budget we have is how many?
0. There are no new.
There are none. All right, and there are none that are listed on this sheet that we are looking at either. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So I just want us to be clear as a council and also clear with our constituents that our budget it's not set, but we have a budget that doesn't include new police officers, that doesn't include anything on this list, which if you add new police officers will be over $5 million. So
that's not correct though, sir.
Okay. Help me out.
Yeah. So what I just explained to you is when you are using these expenses, you don't just put a dollar amount into the budget. There is also the timing of which you meet the expenditure. And so again, my recommendation is augmenting the budget by $300,000. If you augment that budget by $300,000, and they will not be hiring until, you wouldn't be able to bring anyone in, let's say, until the second month of the fiscal year.
No, I understand, not to cut you off, I understand, but if you're, for example, under Destination South Fulton, we may not need to spend the entire $200,000 in personnel because those people may not be hired until January of February.
Correct. Right. And so what you would do is you would increase the head count. You would increase the head count, meaning that once the budget is passed, we would have the authorization to move the money to create the position. So right now, just using round numbers, if you've got 100 police that are listed, and you increase the head count or the ability for the head count to 110, then you would be able, that means they're authorized for 110. That means once you get your cost savings and you allocate these additional funds, et cetera, even if you don't assign them, then when we make some internal adjustments, we can then allocate those police. That is what I'm recommending. And so high level, I didn't, and I still haven't gotten into the weeds. I'm just high level giving you insights that I would allocate the money that allows us to be creative in how we meet these needs. And so if you allocate the funding accordingly, then we can actually take on the allocation of those officers. Right now, we have budgeted the exact same amount of officers that we have in the budget this year. And then we would take those additional funds and administratively, we would be able to create the position based on the time. And so if that time is after Q1, for example, or at the mid-year, then the cost changes significantly.
Okay, so I understand that, Mr. Donald, and now I'm just going to close with the statement, and this is not a question for anyone. I hear you saying that we can move money around. No matter how much we move money around, this sheet says that we are still millions of dollars short. And only a few things have been removed by you. And so it will be up to the council and the constituents who are our bosses to decide which amongst the millions on this sheet we are going to prioritize and pay for, understanding that there may be more money available in a mid-year budget adjustment where we can go back to this sheet and see some of the things that were lower priority on the list, and we might be able to add them back in. But there are still millions of more wishes than we have dollars for.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. Councilman Khalid, your time, and you can go back in. Councilwoman Willis. Hello.
Yes. Thank you for recognizing me, Chairwoman Gums. Mr. Donald, I want to thank you for this presentation, and I want to thank staff for all of their excellent recommendations. I know that we have a lot of wants, but budget constraints, constrain us to prioritize. And so I trust your expertise on what you have recommended. I don't think our budget process should be politicized. I think you have been very transparent with us and the public. I think you have been very transparent with why you have recommended some of the things in the budget that you have. I think that no one knew we were going to go through a global pandemic, and but we are in one. And so therefore we have to make certain decisions that are challenging, and we would get where we need to be, but we didn't get here overnight, and it's not going to take, it's going to take time for us to get where we need to be. One of the things I would like to recommend is before we pave any roads, that we get feedback from the community, because there are some comments in the chat box saying from residents who live on Hall Road.
Okay.
And they're saying they're not in favor of us paving that street. And
Okay.
so before we go down that road, I will.
Is that me? Hello, council?
Did we lose her?
Oh, okay, I thought
want to happen is us to put $200,000 in paving a road that residents are not in favor of paving. Secondly, did we take the $150,000 out of the park and recreation budget for the Juneteenth celebration because the clerk sent the tape and the minutes, and clearly that is not supposed to be budgeted. That should be revenue neutral.
I would have to defer. Mr. Malazi, can you give me some insights on that? I apologize. I wasn't looking at that prior to today. If I don't have an answer for you today, we'll get to that. I believe that one of the priorities, I'm sorry, I do remember what happened with that. I think what occurred there is that we had to identify the $150,000 based on the way the resolution was written. It was not included in the FY21 proposed budget, but as we interpreted the resolution, it is something that by resolution, there must be an allocation for based on how that resolution was written. And so I will defer to the council on anything related to policy, but as the policy is written and interpreted by staff, it would be something that would require us to allocate funding for, because while we are tasked with identifying the way the resolution is written, we're tasked with identifying grants, private sector support, and things of that nature. But for budgeting purposes, if it is something that we are required to implement, you must allocate funds for it.
Okay, so we need to get look at that resolution and get it corrected, because it was clear in the tape. It was clear that was supposed to be revenue neutral, and I cannot see spending $150,000 of taxpayer money for a celebration when we have all of these revenue shortfalls, when we can't even hire officers, when we have to make adjustments in public work projects. And so I will ask that we look at that in the next budget cycle. And just to clarify, while you're asking us to take the 28, take the funding away for the 28 officers, even though we did a $500,000 increase, you're saying that with the current personnel savings, the chief will have the ability to hire 10 officers by the end of this year and another 10 in the first quarter?
Well, so what I'm proposing is to allocate, and I was just using round numbers, right?
Okay.
So I hope I was clear on that, just to give an illumination of what we would do. We would allocate a certain pool of money, and then we're gonna use $300,000 for this conversation. It may change. Remember, you have time to play with the budget, and you guys will hopefully give us time to bring something back. But let's just use 300,000. We look at that 300,000 and we say, okay, to get us 10 officers, how much money would that cost? What projected savings are you going to have? What are our revenue collections going to be? And based on those things within your budget, how would you take this? Again, we're just using 300 as a placeholder, but how would we take this 300,000? And if you were going to hire officers starting on December 1st, you would get 10. What would those total costs be? Can we cover it? Great. Now we've got those 10 officers, but now we're coming up on the mid-year budget. And again, our management style has been suppress the budget early so that we get all of those revenues in, and then we accelerate our spending at the mid-year or in the third quarter. And so now when we bring back our recommendations for the actual mid-year budget modification, we would then request to add up to an additional 10 officers. So we would do our projections based on that. And so that would make it a priority, and that would be how Chief would get 20 officers in the year. 28, it just ain't gonna happen. But we may be able to get closer to that 20. And so, look, we may crunch the numbers, and in quarter one, as we start working through budget adoption, it may only be 8 officers, but we'd allocate a certain amount of money to make sure he gets as close to 10 officers as possible within the first half of the year. And then we reevaluate it at the halfway point and add officers that we can.
Okay, and thank you for that. I just feel that we should do whatever we can to make sure our public safety and public works have priority funding. Residents want to feel safe, and public safety, fire, and police have been doing a good job with the public safety efforts in the city. A safe city also yields better economic development. And so I just think we don't need to, fall off the radar in that area. Can you go back to the park and recreation slide where you had
Council member, may I make one statement,
Yes.
please? Because I think, it seems people are confused, and I want to make sure we make it clear. So the city has no issue with finances in regards to operating. Everything that was in the budget, even prior to the millage rate, increase, that recommendation that I made means that we can deliver services without question. That is not an issue. The city has enough money to operate. Ain't nobody missing, a check. Our lights are on. We don't have any issues there. But the council has been very clear that we are to deliver world-class service to our residents. That is our goal, to deliver world-class services based on what the city envisioned prior to incorporation. And that is the goal and the path that we are on. And so this $6 million in cuts that was highlighted does not mean that the city is falling apart and we won't have parks and rec and you won't have football and you won't when the pandemic is over and this, that, and other. What it does mean is that some of the innovative things that we have done previously, those things just get slowed down a little bit. So we have a 24/7 call center where people can use See, Click, Fix, and all that stuff isn't going anywhere. We're maintaining that service. People can, we've did permits and taken those things online. People can still access those services. That's not going anywhere. We've even added additional innovation. But what it does mean is that how we are able to fix 100 potholes within a 30-day period. Well, because the revenues have been cut, it may take 45. And so as we start to prioritize all of the different needs of the city, we've got to make sure that we're able to maintain a quality level of service despite the pandemic. And so I've received some feedback from staff who, by the way, monitor the chats and try to respond to public comments and things like that. And we want to make clear that our messaging is on point, that there should be no confusion. And I'm not a politician, so I'm not going to get into how electeds communicate, but from a staff, administrative, organizational level, we running this thing like a charm and it's not going to stop. And so we are prepared to implement the will of the council, who is fully focused on world class for their residents. And we're committed to that. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Donner. Can we go back to the slide with the 3 recommendations for recreation, Ms. Diane White? Now, here's the point that I'm making.
Yes, ma'am.
Most of the equipment in Park and Rec and the vans and we inherited from the county. They are over 20 years old. The outdoor theater system is something that we really need because we can do social distancing events with our constituents with the $60,000. I do not agree with spending $150,000 on a party versus we could take that $150,000 and allocate it to one of these things as priority on this list. Thank you very much. And you said one key thing. One key thing you said is that when we became a city, we were delivering status quo services. We committed to our residents to improve services. And so if we're going to improve services, then we need to make sure we put the money and prioritize in ways that we can do that. And I appreciate your recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Willis.
Mayor Pro Tem, in the queue, we have Councilmember Rao, then Councilmember Reeves, and Councilmember Gilliard for the second time.
Okay, I just want to ask council members just for a moment to, if we can make an exception to allow the mayor to make a comment. He is actually unavailable. He is in a class at this point in time, so he wants to come in and make a comment, and then we can resume the order. Would that be fine with the body?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Mayor Edwards?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I told you all was multitasking in not only with the class, but with some other things. And I just wanted to, first of all, thank you all for approving the letter that went to Fulton County explaining the position that all 14 cities have on the CARES Act. I'm proudly want to report to you that the county has agreed to 25 to 30 million.
Oh, wow.
that the state will supplement the difference for a total of $70 million, which makes us a little over $100 per person. Now, Mr. Donald,
Yes, sir.
I think a formal comment is going to come this afternoon.
Yeah.
From the parties. All 14 mayors have agreed to these funds, and I think that's a great victory for us. And I tell my fellow mayors, it's amazing what we can do when we work together. And when we continue to work together, this whole issue of equity seems to disappear. So I hope that we can continue to do what we did on this issue, on other issues that we may have in this county. I got to go, but I just want to let you all know that. And we should be getting something in writing, Mr. Donald, by this evening.
Yes, sir.
How much is it, Mayor?
Okay.
Mayor, how much is it?
Total 70 million. We haven't broke down what school's gonna get what yet, but it's a total of 70 million.
All right. Well, thank you,
Further
Mr. Mayor, for your
information,
leadership on that effort.
I just wanted to get that. I know we're talking about budgets and stuff like that, and I want to get that to you, Mr. Donald. And once I say, hopefully the letter will come to us this afternoon.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Thank
you all
you
so
very
much.
much, Mayor. Have a
Thank
great day.
Mm.
All right. Good news. Councilwoman Rowell, I believe you were next.
Thank you. City Manager Donald, I have a question. I know you broke down your recommendations for how we would allocate these funds
Yes, ma'am.
by department, but they're in buckets and they don't align with the amounts requested. Do you have something? Are you going to be more specific about that?
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes, absolutely. I apologize for not being clear on that. So there are a couple of things that I'm recommending. I think the first thing is I'm recommending taking the big bucket and just allocating it across 3 areas in the adopted budget. One is police, the other is public works, and the third is actually the contingency. So if you looked at, let's say, comms, for example, their request, I believe we can cover through a combination of the city manager's office and the treasurer's office. If you looked at CDRA, some of those things are us just adjusting the agreements and properly adjusting the budget, meaning we have to project the revenues better. While it's a good thing that we have exceeded revenues in that contract regularly, we've now got a baseline on what our building permits look like. With that being the case, we can better project what the revenues are going to be, and then you adjust the expenditures so we don't have to bring that back before council. That should eliminate that 200,000. You follow what I'm saying? So I will better flesh this out. But remember, the decision on the millage rate was just a short time ago. So these are their priorities. Looking at their priorities, I would put them in this bucket, but this is how I plan to actually manage the delivery of adjusting these cuts. And so I went through it verbally, but as is my normal practice, I'll actually have it delivered in a memo on how we're going to manage each one of those issues and in specific order what the priority is. I did the priorities based on their cuts, based on department, but I'm literally going to say, of our 30 priorities, here's my recommendation 1 through 30 in priority order. Here are the ones I recommend coming through the additional revenues, which I just kind of highlighted, and here's how we attack the others throughout the year.
Thank you. And just one other follow-up question. As it relates to our Collab South offices that have been open, which support our Main Street program for, I guess, Roosevelt Highway and Old National, I know that was on the priority list. Do you foresee that being addressed in the same way that you talked about police, that we need to earmark money? Earmark the positions so that they can be funded, because I do think that is a priority. Economic development is critical to our city, particularly, and I don't want us to lose focus on that.
No, ma'am, and I fully agree. And so the contingency fund, so right now, I won't get into it because, some of that has to do with real estate and all of that good stuff. But let's just say you've got that bucket of 2 million in the contingency. Don't forget, we're about to receive the CARES Act funding. Based on our city, I think it should be a little bit around $3 million. And there's some innovative things that we could do. And so I'm looking at that full amount of money to be able to resolve issues around coronavirus and have allowed cost that help to resolve some of these problems. Remember, if we have access to those funds, we don't have to get reimbursed for them, because a part of what I've asked the county to do, and all of us city managers have done this, is give us the direct disbursement of, I think it's 50%. And I sent this to you guys in the letter, but about 50% of those funds. Well, that will help us augment our police staff in real time. And so some of these costs go away. So I wouldn't want you to forget about the caveats that I gave you as I went through the presentation, because I think this news, you guys have been working on this behind the scenes and the public doesn't know, but your advocacy and your letters and all of that being, the biggest and loudest group in this area helps to push that stuff over the top. And so now that we'll have those funds and we'll get a direct disbursement, we'll be able to resolve some of these problems quicker. And so, yes, I'm confident that the economic development stuff, public safety related activities, even some of the IT innovative things that we wanted to do related to cybersecurity, if you look at the CARES Act, they're all allowed cost. And so that helps to alleviate some of those issues. And so now that the mayor's made it public, I can just say that I think we'll be able to resolve a much larger swath of that 6.5 million than we would have before.
Thank you. Mr. Donald, as you mentioned, we are in unprecedented times. And as we work towards finalizing this budget, I'm hopeful that you will be leading these efforts over the next year. And thank you for what you do on behalf of the residents of the city of South Fulton.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, next is Councilmember Reeves.
Thank you. And yes, and thank you, Dr. Rao, for that excerpt on the Main Street program, as that was one of my questions as well. Mr. Donald, thank you for your leadership as well. And so I have a question. What was the max millage rate that we had voted on, but it failed? Was it 13.3 or 13.5 mils?
Ooh,
13.339.
Yeah,
13.339. Okay, that's what I was figuring. And so, Mr. Donald, for the record, if that investment in that millage rate was increased, that would have included the hiring of officers and firefighters, correct?
Yeah, it would have, but I think, great leadership from the council in making a prudent decision. And thanks also to your leadership, your collective leadership. You've advocated on basically all 14 cities in the county to ensure that we'll be able to supplement that. And also through your leadership, you haven't done it on the backs of the public. So I would give you all great kudos in not only making sure we have the necessary resources to deliver world-class services, you've also done so being mindful of our citizens. So I would just say thank you for that and allowing us as staff to kind of put the pieces together.
And that's what I'm getting at as well, because that was based on information, and because of your leadership and your staff, that those decisions that we was able to make to do a balancing act for what's best for the city and what's best for the citizens, that we can come in and have proper services. And as we do believe, as I strongly, firmly believe in a safe and clean city, that is very important to me. And also through this budget, I know that we have to look at it. I know Councilwoman Willis have been on this, and I am working with her. And as we need to really start engaging in the conversations on what we're doing about the sanitation. And the current model that we have is proven to be ineffective. In my opinion, we still have a high-level dumping and high-level littering. Littering is just a mentality that, have to change over time. but we have groups like Keep South Fulton Beautiful, South Fulton Community Cleanup, the Me We Green Team, and the goal is to be all our groups are forming of cleaning, helping keep the city clean. But the absolute goal is to not have them be out there on their time picking up trash. And I think that if we really get this sanitation contract and work with some of our existing vendors, that can be a revenue generating vehicle as well, and to get a real handle on that. So I would like to, after we pass through this budget, really start engaging in that conversation to how we're going to address that, our sanitation.
Yes, sir, absolutely. We're more than prepared for that. I think Mr. Valenzuela, very proactive leader, has started to evaluate. I think Councilmember Willis offline had asked specifically that we look at the process, compare the zones, and she asked for a few things. And so he started on that presentation. We've also been working with Mr. Kerr in purchasing to ensure that we would have a speedy yet thorough procurement if that's the direction that the council would go in. But I do think that, you know, the current model that you've chosen is a quality placeholder that gives you the time to evaluate appropriately. Remember, when we started, we only had about 30% compliance. Now we're at up over 90%. And so that has helped us. While illegal dumping is still an issue for the city, it's reduced it quite a bit. And, you know, we kind of moving forward. So wherever, you know, the council decides, staff will be more than ready to respond. And, you know, we follow your leadership, and whichever direction you want to go in, we will be sure to execute on a world-class level.
Absolutely. And thank you. And thank you for your continued service. And I do just want to make this one last statement, as tomorrow we do celebrate 9/11, to our firefighters, to our police officers, and to our EMT workers. We thank you and salute you, and we honor you. And to our citizens that are watching, when you see one out there this weekend, just stop and just give a hello and a simple thank you. And thank y'all for all y'all doing, being the essential part, the most essential part of this country.
Thank you, Councilmember Reeves. Madam Clerk, do we have any more council members in the queue?
Councilmember Gilliard.
I'm in the queue as well. Did it not pick up?
Councilmember Gilliard and Councilmember Willis the second time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Gilliard.
Councilmember Gilliard.
Madam Clerk, please add me after.
Okay. Councilmember Gilliard, are you there?
Her call dropped.
Okay. Councilmember Willis.
Yes, I just want to really thank the mayor for his leadership and making sure that we get our share of the CARES funding. He mentioned that the county agreed to give the city $70 million, and if I understand this our share will be based on population. Mm-hmm. So 14 cities, I mean, well, within the South region, we probably will get the largest share in the South region, and I don't want to quote what we're going to get because I don't know. But Mr. Donald, I want to ask you, because I know you have also been working closely with this matter. Could you talk about number one, why it was not important to base our budget on what we thought we were going to get in CARES funding? Because you mentioned in a previous meeting that we could not budget based on.
Well, remember, can't discuss.
I got another question.
Okay. Yeah.
The other thing I want you to ask, to talk a little bit, will this funding have some restrictions? Like, don't they? We can't know anything.
Yeah, so I will tell you, while the funding is flexible, and we've got, I would definitely big up Ms. Russell. She's one of the best grant administrators around, and we're excited to have her. There are some flexibilities with the CARES Act funding that you can use it for, that the federal government allows you to do, and also the state has a liberal use of those funds. And so we've seen people be as creative to, public Wi-Fi, which I think is a big thing for our council, and expanding broadband to addressing police and fire and public safety, essential staff member services, but also in how we deliver our services virtually. Those funds can be utilized, and then also even expanding property needs, where we've got some property decisions that are important in our ability to respond to the pandemic, where you can also utilize those funds for that. I will tell you and be very public about it, and I hope our public is listening closely. I believe that our partners at the county have made those restrictions, at least initially, unbearable for cities to deliver those services. And I would request, as our mayors have, and I believe that they got that agreement today. The city manager meeting was yesterday, and so we haven't been able to connect the dots since that time, but the request is that they follow the guidance of the federal and state government in the implementation of CARES Act, so that we can remain innovative and responsive. The way that the county has done it, or at least the way they have listed their reimbursements initially, restricts us well beyond the intent of the CARES Act. And so I think, to answer your question, I would just say we've got the type of quality staff that knows how to manage grants. We've had no issues whatsoever within the history of the city before my tenure, and during, we manage grants extraordinarily well, thanks to our great leadership in the treasurer's office, namely Ms. Russell. And so we know what we're doing, and we need the county to allow us to actually deliver those services.
So will this grant be able to be used for a head count of public safety in any way?
The short answer is yes, but there's some nuances. But the short answer, like I said, I think we'll be able to resolve our issues. So the short answer is yes.
Okay, one last follow-up question as it relative to this funding. Do we have to have this funding spent by a certain period? Because I'm hearing that the funding has to be spent by November 30th.
Well, but no, that's not accurate, because there are extensions on the CARES Act, and there are additional funds that come. So I don't know how their allotments have come. The county has not, I don't want to say appropriately, because they manage their grants extremely well over there as well, but they have not given a full accounting to the cities, which was also requested by the mayors, as well as information related to when they have to not only report, draw down, et cetera. And so I wouldn't want to speak on those deadlines, because they're going to be different if you're a subrecipient versus whether you're the actual grant recipient and things of that nature. So I think we'll wait to kind of hear what the mayors and the Board of Commissioners has come up with. And again, as per my practice, I'll make sure to not only report back, but also put those things in writing.
And so I just want to reiterate that the county got $104 million, and of that $104 million, they are now allocating $70 million to all of the cities. And here it is, September. And you and the mayor have been diligently working with the county and advocating. And some of the, we even had a threat, all 14 cities had a threatened litigation. And so we appreciate both of your leadership in this effort. And I think it's going to help a lot of, 14 cities that is in desperate need for this money to deliver the services that is needed to our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Willis. Is Councilwoman Gilliard back on?
Councilmember Gilliard? It shows she's here, but she's not answering. Councilmember Baker is next.
Councilmember Baker.
Yes, thanks for recognizing me. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Donald, first of all. And there's one thing in particular that I think may need to be amplified a little bit more. When I listen to the comments that we receive, especially during the millage raid, and even the comments regarding our budget in the state of the city. I like the way that you explain how our budget reconciles, and normally the mid-year budget is when we begin to accelerate spending after being conservative during the first quarter. So I think that it's important. I think our comment card, it was only one, but the comment card was a concern, because when they listened to us pontificate about the state of our city's finances, many of our residents may misunderstand or mistake us for being in the water
Oh,
when we're
yeah.
actually not.
Yeah, you're 100% correct, sir. That is not the case. I think it's pretty clear, and the council knows, but very early on, unlike those northern, and we'll make sure all of those presentations are on the city manager's page from day one. But one of the things that we saw, and it was in the first audit that we received from Malden and Jenkins, is that all of the other cities, specifically the North Fulton cities, started off with they started off with a larger tax base. They started off in the black, whereas the city of South Fulton started off in the red. And our projected budget at one time, our budget deficit was at about $25 million. I'll never forget that presentation that we provided, and we had our first mid-year budget, and we resolved the bulk of that. I think you'll even remember last year, there was talks of a $7 million budget deficit, whereas this time, despite being in the midst of a pandemic, we actually, for the first time in the city's history, and kudos to the city treasurer for that, we are submitting our first CAFR 2 years in advance of when it was expected, and the city has a $2.5 million fund balance, which at this early in our career that's a humongous deal. In addition to that, while these other cities, and no shade to them, their management and their council likely just has different commitments, but our council has decided that not one single staff member will have any negative impact. And not only have we ensured that our staff remains intact and we deliver these world-class services, or at least aspire to get there, we brought more services online before anybody else. Our court system is now online. All of these different innovative things that we're doing despite the pandemic. It is just that if you're correcting 20 years plus of neglect, it costs. I think when I started, I told the example of when I was playing AAU basketball on Old National, there was a huge pothole that was still there on the third day that I started work here. That's been resolved, but that's a 20, 30-year problem that's been in place that our council has been correcting at light speed. And so it's definitely not that the city has any financial issues. That would be irresponsible for us to put that in play. But what it is that the wants and the needs of our citizens far outweigh what our budget allows. And so we're being creative in doing so. And I think your commitment as a collective council with all of these investments have to start being applauded, so folks know the direction that we're going in. So it's not financial issues, but it's tough when you prioritize which of a 30-year problem you're going to take care of first. And I think, you've done a great job of that. And so that's why, we've been so successful, because of that commitment and leadership. So
I think, and I appreciate you for that. And I also want to say thank you to Public Works and Mr. Valenzuela. A lot of people have been receiving mixed signals in my district in particular. They're like, I thought we were in trouble. The pandemic had us, pinched a little bit. But when they saw the streets being paved in District 7 throughout Cornell Road and Crawford Court, as well as Oakley Township, I think the engagement and the way that we put our message out is most important. And we have to do a better job of that. But I also, while I'm speaking, would like to thank from myself to the rest of my colleagues in particular, thank you guys for the way that you've handled this situation. Mr. Donald, it goes without saying, we appreciate your leadership. You've implemented things during this crisis/pandemic that has been watched and impersonated by, in many facets, by many other jurisdictions and municipalities surrounding us. So thank you for that. But also, I appreciate the way that we have actually lifted ourselves by our bootstraps and moved forward. And, whether it be all of the meetings and everything that we've had to do and the sacrifices that's been made, while we're dealing with the pandemic, but still thinking about the rest of the citizens, it's been a lot. And it feels good to know that we will at least go towards this budget year coming up with concern for the unforeseen and the possibility of still making everything come together. So thanks to my colleagues and to you as well, Mr. Donovan, staff. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. Definitely well said, Councilmember Baker. Madam Clerk, are there any other individuals in the queue? And Councilwoman Gilliard is unavailable.
Okay. No, there's no one else in the queue, Madam Pro Tem.
All right. And is this the action item?
No, ma'am. This is the second reading.
All right. And there are
And
no more.
There's no other items on the agenda.
Mayor
right.
Pro Tem?
Yes, sir.
One clarifying thing, and so while this is the city manager's recommendation, I did want to let you know that even today, the full staff is available for any direct questions that you may have. There are a lot of needs, and I know the council, as always, will be thoughtful in prioritizing, but if you so choose to ask any specific questions and allow those staff members to make a pitch, because again, I did, my recommendation limits it, but again, of course, I've got the broader view. If you desire to hear from them, they are more than available, but also at the next council meeting, you have the information necessary the next budget hearing. So as you make your decisions on the final budget, they will be available at that time too, to answer any questions on how you like to allocate.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Madam Pro Tem?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Lastly, I just wanted to ask real quick to the city manager, will we be, I don't think we're having an executive session today, but at some point we were asked to come back to mayor and council regarding items that probably should be handled in executive session, but still may affect the budget. Upon the council and mayor's request, we were asked to bring back something. So I want you to consider that as well as those other things when we get together again.
Yes, sir. And I know we've got a meeting on that topic today. I think that we've talked about that solution, and I think I'll have that recommendation for today. And so at that next meeting, because I think it's only in a couple of days, we would have that rectified and in the budget. I think I would recommend though, the treasurer's office actually coordinates, how do I say this appropriately? The actual movement within the budget. And so while the department heads will be available for structure purposes, and I know the mayor will be back by then, what we would be proposing is to actually lay that budget out, whether it be in OpenGov or spreadsheet or however Mr. Malazi would so choose, that we probably need to go through and look at how you would allocate that. And so again, I'm going to have a detailed memorandum with all of the information, and we will incorporate whatever consideration comes from CARES Act funding. So we'll need a little bit of time for that, but at the next set of budget deliberations, that would likely be a good exercise. And then I think that process that we're bringing back will be very easy to incorporate. And again, today I'm prepared during our time to flesh that out.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilwoman Willis.
I move that we adjourn.
All right, there's a motion on the floor to adjourn.
Second.
Madam Clerk.
It's been motioned and seconded to adjourn the meeting by Councilmember Willis and Councilmember Reeves. Councilmember Rao?
Yes.
Councilmember Gums?
Yes.
Councilmember Willis?
Yes.
And you said Councilmember Gilliard is not present, right?
Yes, she had to leave.
Okay, Councilmember Reeves?
Aye.
Councilmember Khalid?
Yes.
Councilmember Baker.
Aye.
The motion approved to adjourn at 11:35 a.m.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Have an awesome day.